Hey guys, what's up? My name is Jose, and today we're going to be talking about the Sigma 50mm 1.4 art lens for the Sony E-mount. Getting right into it, kind of a disclaimer, this is my favorite lens. Out of all the lenses that I own, this is something that I always have on me. This is what I usually have by default in my camera, ready to go. And as you can see, it's pretty banged up to show for it. I run this everywhere I go. Product photography, weddings, portraits, events, you name it, I always have my 50. But, we'll talk about that later. Getting right into it, the specifications of it, of course, it's a 50mm. Lowest aperture is a 1.4, which is great for some blurry background. The diameter of it is 77 millimeters. So if you're looking to buy like a filter for it, like I run a lot of this Tiffin Pro Mist filter. Pro Mist Black adds a little bit of bloom in the highlights and all that stuff. You want to go for 77. So if you've already got filters in that size for some reason, that's where you want to go. So it has a pretty sturdy body, kind of an all metal construction, and then like rubber for the focusing ring. Of course, in case it wasn't obvious, it's a prime lens, so it only stays at 50 millimeters. You can't zoom in, you can't zoom out. It's got autofocus, then it's got a knob on it for to force manual focus, which is great. What else about it? Of course, it's the E-mount system, so it connects electronically to your Sony E-mount camera for super quick autofocus and aperture changes, all that good stuff. So about the lens and why I like it, I think 50 millimeters is kind of the go-to for most things. 50 millimeters is pretty similar to what the eye sees in terms of focal length, and so it's important to have something that people can easily relate to, and that's a 50 millimeter. Like the photos it takes just look great because they look natural. And I recommend having one on me or you at all times. Now, in terms of the other 50 millimeter options out there, there are a couple. There's Sony's G Master, the new G Master lineup they just released, which has a couple prime lenses. I'm not going to get into that. I heard they're great, but I don't have one. I've never used one, so I'm not going to talk about that or those. Mainly, I'm going to focus on Sony's budget 1.8 50 millimeter. I think that one's fairly cheap. I'm going to talk about the Zeiss 55 millimeter. That's around this price range. And then I'll mention the other Zeiss, the 50 millimeter Zeiss, once I talk about the other lenses. So this is, just so we're aware, this goes retail for around $750 on Amazon from certain retailers. Andromeda will sell it for I think $950, or Adorama. I don't know how to pronounce it. So make sure you kind of price check if you're thinking about buying this lens. Really, go to different retailers, because some will have big discrepancies in what they price this lens at and what they will sell it to you for. I bought this used for I think $650 on a used market online. That was back when this lens also first released, so I've had this for a while, and it was still fairly expensive. And I think they still go for around that price. The price of this lens hasn't really fallen, and I don't think it will anytime soon. It's a great lens for the price range. Your other option in this price range is the Zeiss 55 millimeter 1.8. I think that one is slightly sharper, but it's also more compact. That's another great thing too. So it's not as heavy. It's a little bit shorter. But it only stops down to 1.8. This goes to 1.4. Now the thing with this one is at 1.4 it's not super sharp. I'm not gonna lie to you. I rarely shoot at 1.4. The only times I will shoot at 1.4 is if I really want bokeh in the background, or if I'm in a low light situation, which is what I think this lens is great for. I shoot a lot of weddings and a lot of dark reception rooms, and this lens comes in handy because of that, because I can stop down to that aperture, right? Because the lower you go, the more light you let in. And so 1.8 to 1.4 is a big difference. So that's why I ended up choosing this lens at this price range versus the Zeiss 55. But I think both lenses are great. I think if you wanted something a little bit more compact and you really do believe that you'll only be shooting in well-lit environments in the daytime, the Zeiss is great. Is a great option. I think you can usually also find them a little bit cheaper used, so kind of keep that in mind. And then kind of the more expensive options, or of course the G Masters, which we're not going to get into. And Zeiss actually has a 50 millimeter. It's mainly more used for videos just because of the rolling aperture, but I think it's about twice as much as this one. It's closer to $2,000. You know, please don't quote me on it. I think it's or 1,600. You know, look up the price. That's an amazing lens. It's just as sharp as this. They're very similar in size. It's slightly smaller, but it focuses way faster. I think it also goes down to 1.4, though I'm not sure. But do check that out if you have the money and the budget to go for that. I would highly recommend that Zeiss lens. But for me, if you asked me and you wanted the best bang for your buck, it would be this art lens. It's just well built. You know, it can take a beating, as you can see, and it's never failed me for anything. It's a beautiful lens. It gets exactly what I need, and it does what I ask of it. I actually have another art lens. I've got the Sigma 35 millimeter that we'll talk about in a later video. But just in general, I like the series, the art series. I think it's very well built. It feels great to hold. And I think in the world of photography now, especially in bigger jobs, you need that confidence in your gear, you know. So that, I don't know. I think this is a great lens. I highly recommend it. And that kind of concludes it. In terms of should you get this lens? Yes. I'm going to keep it short. I think if there's one lens every photographer needs in their bag, it's a 50 millimeter. And then you can move on to a 24 to 70 or a 35 or some zoom lenses. But this is my favorite lens because it's the one I use the most. I'm lucky enough to have the Sony G-Master 70-200 2.8 that is like way better than this in terms of build quality and sharpness and just range that I can use it at. But this just does everything I need. I technically don't even need that 70-200, and I might get rid of it soon just because I don't use it as much as some of my other lenses. So, you know, really think about if you want to get it or not. It's a beautiful lens, and I think Sigma did an amazing job with it. Throughout the video, you've seen some of the sample photos I've taken with it. It's just extremely sharp, and it just does what you need. So that kind of wraps it up. I don't really need to say much about that lens other than you should buy it. Look for it used, of course, when you first start off. You know, like eventually, 30 years from now when I sell that lens, it'll be banged up, but it still works perfectly. And so I think that's kind of what you should look for if you're on a budget, is just look for cosmetic damage, and it's going to be fine. So if you want, you can even wrap it in some type of, like, you know, lens skin or whatever, and it'll still do great. So Sigma 50 millimeter 1.4, I approve. Any questions, you know, leave them down in the comments. I'll be happy to answer it. And thanks for watching. Cheers.